Welcome to your very first module of actual lessons when it comes to veterinary entomology. We're going to start with the very basics of arthropods, move through things like classification, and then finish this module out with the classes of arthropods. Remember to double check your reading list so you know what reading goes with these lessons. It's usually right at the beginning of the textbook. But I've developed the reading to give you a really broad base for these lessons that I'm going to give you. So the way that I do this is textbooks are designed, especially the one that I've written for you, they're designed to give you a really broad overview of the information. I want you to read it before you do these lessons. This is based on some of the science that we know on how we learn. When you learn something new, your brain is constantly trying to associate it with something you already know. So if you come to class having read a textbook for the first time, even if it's all new information, if it's absolutely things you've never seen before in your life, you will find that listening to me talk about it, now you're going to be associating it with some of the stuff that you read. So before you start these lessons, start out by reading the reading assignments. You don't have to take a lot of notes. Don't really read them, point by point, try to memorize anything. Just read it. Just enjoy the reading process. All of it's going to be new, or at least some of it. And then come and watch these lessons. These lessons are then designed to pick out those points that are the absolute most important from that chapter. So then that way you hear it a slightly different way. I give a little bit more detail. I add in some more information. I try to associate it in a slightly different way, because then you now have heard it two different times in two different ways. After you listen to these lessons, go back to that reading and reread it again. It'll be a lot more familiar. And that's the third time you've now heard this information. So you will begin to assimilate it, so to speak, really, really easily. So that's the way I kind of want you to do these sorts of lessons. All right, so let's get started, shall we? As biologists, we really like putting things into boxes and putting them into groups so we can understand them. This is both the strength and I think the weaknesses of being a scientist in the natural world. We don't like things being messy. We don't like things being sort of all over the place. We want to categorize. We want to classify. So this putting things in little boxes we call classification. The way that we do this is we go from larger groups to smaller groups until we get to the smallest group of like organisms possible. We get them individualized. Now, we do this because this gives us a way to really systematically study the natural world around us. We don't like that messiness. We want to be able to compare like groups to like groups. Now, the way that we classify these things is kind of like how we write addresses. So I've got on the left here an address for you. This is, basically, if you were writing, say, a letter to me, you would start with the largest group. And, we don't say the world because there's no other place to send these things to at the moment. So we start with the largest group we have on Earth, which is the country. Okay, so we start with the country. So for my address, we start in the United States. But this includes millions upon millions of people. So if you were to try to send a letter to me in the United States, it would never get to me. So we have to go a little bit smaller. So then we move to the state. So I live in Texas. So I'm in the United States, slightly smaller. It's the state of Texas. Now, even in Texas, though, there's millions of people. So we have to move even smaller. Then we want to get into somewhere within that geographical region of Texas. So we're going to go for the city. So that city is in Bryan. So I live in Bryan, Texas, right near College Station. But even in Bryan, there are a lot of people. Okay, so now I'm differentiated from everybody else who lives in other cities within the state of Texas, within the country of the United States. But even then, it's a little bit harder. There might be even more Adrian Brundages in Bryan. So we have to get even more specific. So we have to write down my specific street in that city, in that state, in that country. Now, I'm not going to put my street on the web, as fun as it would be for everybody to come and visit me, but on that particular street. But on my street, there's, 20, 30 houses. There's quite a few people on this street. So the poor mail carrier doesn't know which one of these houses is mine. So we have to give them the exact number of the house on that street, in that city, in that state, in that country. So my personal house, let's say I'm living at 1313 Not on the Web Street in Bryan, Texas, United States. Okay, so even in my one house, though, there are several people living here. Okay, so let's say we want to get specifically to me. We have to go even smaller than just this house. So you can't just say occupant and assume it's going to get specifically to me. So we'll go with my surname. My last name is Brundage. But there is more than one Brundage that lives in this household. So if you sent a letter to Brundage at 1313 Not on the Web Street, Bryan, Texas, United States, there are several people who would open that letter and say, no, this is to one of us. So in order to get to me specifically, you have to put my first name. So to send me a letter, you send it to Adrian Brundage at 1313 Street, Not on the Web Street, Bryan, Texas, United States. And that gives exactly where you want it to go. That gets exactly to me. So this is how we classify people in an address sense, right? You can get to anybody across the world if you know this information about them and know that it is the correct person, because it's a box within a box within a box. Get smaller and smaller and smaller, more and more specific. Even though there might be a bunch of Adrian Brundages in the United States, there's only one that lives in this particular house, on this particular street, in this particular city, in this state, in this country. Neat. So that is the exact same thing that we do when we classify organisms. We start with the largest group of organisms. In this case, it's going to be the Animalia. We start with the kingdom. Okay. Now, this is different from all of the living organisms on Earth. So this is a very large group of organisms that share a like type of characteristics. So a bunch of characteristics in common. Just like we share our geographical location with everybody else in the United States, we can differentiate ourselves from people in Canada or Mexico or the UK or China or wherever else. We can differentiate all those organisms that fall into Animalia when we compare them with, say, plants or prokaryotes or other eukaryotes or things of that nature, right? Okay, so this large group is the kingdom. This is Animalia. Then we get into smaller groups. We go into the phylum. So the phylum is a group of animals. So everybody in this phylum is all in Animalia, just like we're all in the United States. But it's in the phylum Arthropoda. And this group of animals has the same thing in common. Then we can break them up even further. So we take all these arthropods and we break them up a little bit more based on their body form and their physiology. We can then break that up into even smaller groups. So we go the kingdom Animalia, so all animals, break them up into those that all have the same characteristics, the arthropoda. We break that up further into groups that have the same characteristics. In this case, it's all the insects, or in the class Insecta. Then we break them up into the orders. So these are all even smaller groups of insects that have the same basic characteristics. So in this case, if we're looking at this particular fly, we're breaking them up into the order of flies, or the Diptera. Then we move into even smaller groups, the family Muscidae, or the house flies. Okay? And then we go even smaller, because there are a whole bunch of organisms that can fall into Muscidae. Then we move into the genus Musca, or the flies, and finally the species Domestica. So in this case, I can get all the way down to the genus Musca domestica, genus Musca, species Domestica, and I can talk about this particular species of fly to anybody across the world, and they know exactly what I am talking about. I say Musca domestica, they know exactly what species or what type of fly I'm talking about, because we have categorized it this way. So we get to this genus and species. Now, you'll notice the way that I wrote the genus and species here. We have some special nomenclature for when we communicate about organisms that we classify in this way. Whenever you write the genus and the species, you have to italicize the names. So the genus and species are always italicized, or if you're trying to write this by hand, you underline it because it's really hard to make italics just by hand. But if you're, say, writing this on an exam or something like that, you write it by hand, got Musca domestica. And the genus is always capitalized, while the species is always lowercase. The reason we do this is because we often name organisms based on Latin or Greek root words that explain something about them, either their physical form or where they're found, or more recently, people are naming species after famous people or characters. So there's been some insects recently named after Lady Gaga, others named after Yoda, etc. So in order to communicate what we mean, which one of these categories we're looking at, we have to write them in a particular way. So anytime you see an uppercase italicized word, that is always a genus. And anytime you see a lowercase italicized word, that is always a species. Now, when we do write things, we don't have to write out the full genus all the time. So the first time you see a genus and species written out, you will see the genus fully spelled out, like in this case, Musca. But subsequent times, once we've, let the reader or let whatever know, like, okay, now we're talking about Musca, then we can shorten that word just to make it a little easier. We like making our lives a little bit easier. That's just the way we are. So we shorten that just to an M and then a period and then the species. So either you have to fully write it out or just the first letter, but that first letter is still capitalized. Now, we never want to write just the species without the genus. So I would never just say domestica without putting in Musca. This is because that word domestica, again, it is based on the Latin and the Greek. And so there's a lot of other species out there that are called domestica, but they're in different genera. So you always want to have the genus and the species together, or at least the first letter of that genus and the species. They're always italicized and they always have their proper capitalization. All right. So looking at this classification system, we put all animals in a single group, the Animalia. This is a common way that we can visualize how we are organizing these specimens or these species of animals. So we then break them up based on physical, unchanging characteristics into smaller and smaller groups. Physical, unchanging characteristics. The reason we do these physical unchanging characteristics is because we don't want to rely on something that can change from, say, day to day or time to time, like, coloration. Coloration can sometimes be used in a pinch, but it's a pretty bad way of organizing species. Because think about it. How often do you personally, as a human being, change the color of your skin or your hair or whatever? If you're like me, I've got very, very light skin. If I go out in the sun, I'm going to get burned. It's going to turn red. So if you were trying to categorize me based on the color of my skin, that would be an awful way of doing it, because some days I'm super white, some days I'm red, some days I'm freckled. I never get tan, but some people really, really do. And there's a full range of different skin colors out there. The same with hair. You can change your hair color. In my case, I've got strawberry blonde hair. If I go out in the sun during the summer, it turns much lighter blonde. If I come inside during the winter, it gets darker red. And sometimes I just dye it crazy colors. So coloration is not a great thing, but you can classify humans on things like we have 2 legs, we have 2 arms in general, or at least we were born usually with 2 arms. There are people who have lost limbs, right? But you can see that they have them at some point. So that's the type of thing we're thinking about. Physical, unchanging characteristics that don't naturally change without, say, a massive injury or some big issue that causes you to lose those characteristics. So when we look at, say, insects, we break them up by their physical, unchanging characteristics into the phylum Arthropoda. So arthropods consist of 80% of all known animals. Arthropods are really, really diverse, and they're really, really common. So 80% of all animals out there share the same physical, unchanging characteristics that make them arthropods. So 80% of all described animal species in the world are arthropods. So we're going to spend the next several lessons looking at what these physical, unchanging characteristics are that actually make up the phylum Arthropoda. All right, so that's where we're going to stop with this video. Next lecture, we're going to go over those physical, unchanging characteristics that make arthropods arthropods. Let me know if you have any questions.